The Still Loading podcast is brought to you by the wonderful people on Patreon. Amazing people like Mike from the Old Switcheroo podcast, Sang H, Red from the Kaito and Red Show, Stephen P, Parallax Puddles, Gilmer, Kevin from the Bit by Bit Foundation, Pib Extra, Doug from the Nostalgia More Canon podcast, Melissa S, Ryan K, Matt aka Stormageddon, and Mr. Biscuits have all been wonderful enough to support the show over there. So if you would also like to get your name read at the beginning of an episode, along with a bunch of other goodies, go over to patreon.com/stillloadingpod and check out everything it has to offer. On this episode of Still Loading, there will be no Uncharted jokes on this podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and on today's episode, we are diving in to the history of cheating, of all things. So we're cheaters on this episode, y'all. The history of cheating in video games. My wonderful guest here today wrote a fantastic book called I Am Not Good, The History of Cheating in Video Games. Welcome, first time to the show, Nate Drake. Nate, how are you doing today?
Doing very well, Josh, and thank you so much for having me on here.
Thank you for coming on the show. And for full disclosure, listeners, I did receive a review copy of this. Even with that, like I said, for the other book from Retro Game Books, Nadia's book, both of these books are fantastic. I highly recommend you getting them. And over the course of this episode, you'll find out a little bit more as to why I think you all should get this book. But we're here to talk about the history of cheating in video games. You wrote a book called I Am Not Good, The History of Cheating in Video Games. And I want to first start off with this, where your book changed the way I look at cheating in video games, because I'm a product of the 90s in America, and I went on the internet and looked up cheat codes and tricks and glitches at my local library because I didn't have internet at home, and I would print them out. I even had it was specifically Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. That was like my big one. And I even I had a binder somewhere where I wrote down all of the different tricks and glitches, as well as, like, if for those who've played Tony Hawk, you remember, like, if you did a special trick over like a gap, it would be highlighted blue because you did like a special thing. I started writing those down and describing where they were located in the levels. So when this book came across to me, shout out to Brian Rigsby, the owner of Retro Game Books and the publisher. I was immediately like, I have to check this out. And the reason I said that it kind of changed my brain chemistry a bit, that would change my view on cheating, was that I never really looked at cheating as an integral part of the gaming experience, like cheat codes specifically, as such an integral part of the gaming experience. You talk a bit about it in the book, how now, like, cheat codes like the Contra Code, or the Konami Code, excuse me, or the Colossal Cave Adventure, stuff like that, they're kind of more relegated to Easter eggs more than anything now.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's why when I was reading your book, it changed the way I look at it, because I didn't really think of it. I thought of it as like an inside joke for so many years, like, haha, Konami Code, or this or that. And the way you wrote about it, though, talking about how it was almost expected. It was almost like not a rite of passage, but it was almost something that it was much more commonplace than you would really think it would have been. Trading codes and secrets with your friends on the playground and stuff like that. So I first wanted to compliment the book before I go into any questions, just saying, like, this is what I got out of it. Like, I got out of reading the book was just, it changed the way I look at cheat codes.
It's very kind of you to say so, Josh. Thank you. And I'm glad you had that experience. I think it's a generational thing, as you say. I mentioned in the book, I spoke to a lady who said, oh, my 16-year-old son has very strong views about cheating. And of course, you're growing up in the 90s. As you say, you're reading about it in magazines. Games are fiendishly difficult. And we're in that era where we simply have to take the codes that we can. And you say we have a very different perspective on it looking back these days.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I had actually, was the generational gap that you kind of discuss a little bit in the book, where cheating has evolved to a point where it's not, it just sounds so weird, like you're cheating in videos, but cheat codes specifically. Cheat codes aren't as much of a thing as they used to be anymore. And the idea of cheating in a video game has evolved to the point where like you were saying, like you were saying about the 16-year-old, like it's such a negative connotation because of multiplayer, because of competitive online gaming, where cheating in that has a lot more repercussions than getting 30 lives in Contra.
Exactly so. And we have to cast our minds back to when people like us were 16 many, many years ago. We probably have our friends round in person. We might have four-way controllers on the N64 or play a game using a special tap on the PlayStation, and we play on equal terms as friends. And and your mum would bring in Rice Krispie squares and Tang and so on and so forth. The times have evolved in that regard, because what became something like a friendly match between equals, you can give someone an unfair competitive advantage now when it comes to online gaming.
Yeah, and it's something in line with what I said before, where I had to reevaluate cheating in games. That was one of those things where I think in the back of my mind, I recognized that evolution, but it wasn't really like just kind of expressed it as clearly as what you wrote in your book, of just how much it has actually changed over the last 30 some odd years, 30, 40 years. So I guess to really kind of dive into more specifically with this, excuse me, what made you want to write this book? Like the history of cheating in video games also is something that I don't think, in a weird sense, I'd like to think I'm pretty like tuned in, like plugged into the game history community, like people who are like genuine, not me. I'm more of someone who's interested in it, but I don't do, boots on the ground research type of thing.
Naturally.
And I don't see a lot of talk about cheating, the history of cheating in video games. This is the first time I've really seen a full like deep dive onto the subject. So what made you want to write this book?
And in a sense, Josh, you've answered your question, because you say even someone who is well informed as you are and familiar with gaming history, it struck me this is not something which had really been covered in any depth before. Now, my day job as a cybersecurity journalist, I deal with hacking, I deal with people doing things to run exploits on systems. And I've always loved retro games. So this seemed quite a natural extension to it. And like we were saying earlier, also what fascinated me at how as a culture, how we used to embrace cheating so much, but how we've come to sort of regard it with a certain amount of caution. So I wanted to talk about that golden age in which we actually enjoyed that. And, it's something I mentioned towards the start of the book. You go back to the 1980s, the average NES cartridge, for instance, it held less memory than a pocket calculator. The developers had no choice but to make games fiendishly difficult, or you could just finish them in a weekend from renting them. So this is where, of course, cheating became such an essential part of our culture. These days, of course, usually when you get a video game, you have to download 100 gigabytes of content just to be able to play it. Of course, we have a much more immersive world, naturally. As I understand it, I don't follow modern video games, sadly.
Yes, it's very much as you describe it. You buy a game, and even if you have the disc, a lot of times now, unfortunately, you are buying essentially a key to play the game. You're going to end up like download the entire game. Not every game is like that, but it's becoming more and more commonplace that a disc is just a fancy key to download a game, as opposed to having all the data for the game on the disc. And even if it has the data on the disc, you get day one patches usually. It's a whole thing.
Absolutely.
And of course, now Sony just announced they're ending physical media production.
I just read that. Yes, absolutely. It's
still
2027. Is that right? It's 2027 onwards. Is that right?
I think it's 2028. Is
2028. That's right. Absolutely.
There's still a lot of blowback, so maybe they'll change their opinion. Who knows? This is still like only a couple. By the time we're recording this is still only a few weeks after that announcement, but we'll see. Either way, I'm not happy about it. But Um, yeah, so yeah, I was really happy when I saw this, and like you said, like there's not a lot of people talking about this. And do you have any thoughts as to maybe why that is? Like why cheating in like cheat codes and bugs and glitches and whatnot in video games aren't discussed with the level of depth prior to your book? Do you have any thoughts as to maybe why?
It's an excellent question, Josh. I think, as we've said before about the culture shifting in this, and for example, we've talked about the fact that you get a video game these days, there's a day one patch, So if, for example, something like Doom had come out today, and we had the ability to fix any kind of glitch or problem, we wouldn't have things like rocket jumping or people clipping through walls and that kind of, because the developers simply would have fixed it. There are some exceptions to that rule, and I've discussed those in the book, but generally speaking, we're in a much better place now. I think also when we started out as well with we were in a sort of unusual position, because when we started out using cheat codes, really magazines, to some extent BBS and early internet and word of mouth were the main mediums we had to discuss cheating. So people have a slight disconnect, I think. I don't think many people were cheating in a very, very sort of comprehensive fashion when they were first playing this game. It's usually something you come back to later after discovering the cheat exists and go back and play the game. Some very nice people who reviewed my book, as a matter of fact, have said that reading it actually encouraged them to go back and try some of those video games when they discovered that various cheats were available. So
that was some of the ones for me too. There was a couple cheat codes you mentioned. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that, because some of the games I just didn't grow up with, so my friends didn't play, so it's not like I could hear about them, on the playground, as it were.
Naturally,
one of the things you also break down in this book is kind of the differences between, like, how can I put this? It's not just cheat codes. There's also bugs and also secrets. And could
absolutely.
you, in a nutshell, kind of describe how you delineated, how you kind of differentiated, I guess, like what made a cheat code versus a bug versus even maybe like a developer intended type of thing? Like,
indeed.
How was it? How did you have to break that down? And what was kind of like your, I guess, like, how did you organize those?
That's an excellent question, John. And this is something I actually discuss in the first chapter, and I begin in a very British fashion by saying it's called an apology, if you remember. And this is the British, we like to love the king, we like to apologize for things. And I said, look, it's hard to define, because there are things that you can do to give yourself a competitive edge. Is a skilled speed runner for a particular game, are they cheating? No, they're simply very skilled and experienced people there, but they might exploit certain features in a way that weren't meant to be, simply the developers didn't intend. That's the thing. For example, I know when people these days have to have records for games like Mario and Donkey Kong, the usual requirement to do so on original hardware, on the basis that an emulator, for example, might give you some kind of unfair edge. But ultimately, I came down to the conclusion that I had to follow this not an encyclopedia. And I've delineated this in my own mind by talking about things, for example, like how people exploit in-game glitches, how there are some, for example, cheats are included. For example, the original Konami Code, which were never intended to be a cheat per se in the conventional sense of the word, but were left in simply for quality testing by developers. And of course, you have actual deliberate cheat codes included by them. So, and of course, there are people who will swear blind to you that there were certain cheats, like, for example, seeing Lara Croft in her birthday suit, which never actually existed, or at least not in the terms that people said would be included in the game after all. So honestly, the categories I've said are rather arbitrary, but of course there are fantastic websites out there if you want a comprehensive encyclopedia of every category of every type of cheat.
Well, and that kind of leads into something that I also enjoyed about the book, is that you don't focus on just like, well, this is the first cheat code and then this happened and this happened. This is
indeed.
But you focused a lot on the context, the cultural context around cheat codes as well, like the gaming culture and zeitgeist at the time, where rumors were a big part of cheat codes, not just in terms of how they passed, but you mentioned the Lara Croft thing in Tomb Raider with the everyone thought you could, have a nude code for it. Obviously that wasn't true. Gross that people perpetrated as long, but
for a children's game, yes, indeed.
Yeah, exactly. But it also was like one of the big sections will talk about Mortal Kombat and Ermac and all of the intersections of how like that game almost not single-handedly, but like that game is like has such a unique place in the history of cheating in video games, because it's got a little bit of everything. It's got bugs and glitches and misconceptions. So I guess to kind of go into that a bit further, what's something that really surprised you about researching this? Like, because to me, it was like seeing how much of the stuff around the cultural elements really are influenced by cheating, and like how much they
Yes.
kind of like meld with each other in not very distinct ways. Like some things aren't really cheat codes, but they kind of are turned into cheat codes through cultural usage and stuff like that. So what were some of the
Absolutely.
things that you like in doing research just like learned that really surprised you about this?
Yes, I mean, I think you're right to say Mortal Kombat was a really good example because, as you say, we touched a lot of things about where, for example, characters like Ermac became a character through people misunderstanding it, of course, and it being the basis of a number of April Fool's jokes. But what really struck me about this particular game, and as I think the whole area, by the way, video game censorship is also a fascinating area. I could do another book on that, and I hope to in the future. But to me, what was interesting to me about that was the blood code. And as I'm sure viewers know, for the Sega, although Nintendo put their foot down and made sure that blood became grey and was only technically sweat and didn't sort of fall on the ground the same way, one of the developers for the Genesis version was given permission officially by Midway to actually place a blood code there to enable a cheat menu which allowed the game to be restored to its former glory, to allow the fully gruesome fatalities and allow for the blood to be had in all its glory. And that was an interesting act of rebellion, in my opinion, after all. It was talking about that this was at a time when we didn't really have much in the way of regulation for video games. As a matter of fact, Mortal Kombat played a key role in ensuring, at least in the USA, they started treating video games in a similar way to films and placing age ratings in place, after all. So I thought that was what you said before was interesting. I think that cheating also captures the zeitgeist of what we're actually doing in terms of our values at the time.
Yeah.
We also saw the same thing with the Game Genie, and that was the interesting thing to me with the fight between Nintendo and Galoob, who were the North American distributor of the Game Genie device, although it was originally developed in good old England. And at the time, Nintendo were trying to argue that such devices were effectively creating a pirated copy of a game, a derivative copyrighted work. The whole argument was legal nonsense, obviously. It wasn't a permanent. These are things that people are doing in the privacy of their own home. And it's no more a violation of copyright than it would be if you simply bought a textbook and decided to put post-its and annotate it with a highlighter. That's not, it's not a violation in itself. But that was really what sort of the thing that struck me most as well. I think cheating actually provided very crucial insight into our culture, and even these days, of course, how we view cheats as well. So it gives us an idea of how we view that kind of activity and how we view gaming.
When you were talking about that, it also made me just think of something else. Like, because when you talk about Game Genie specifically, in kind of relation to that, the Game Shark.
Yes.
One of the things that I learned from your book that I don't know, maybe it's common knowledge, but I had no idea. I had no idea it was an action replay. I've heard of action replay,
Yes.
but I had no idea that the Game Shark was just the North American port of action replay, which originated over in the UK. That blew my mind. And then that led me to this next question, where in doing research for this, did you have any issue with trying to find information about cheat codes and cheating in video games outside of North America? Because I think I talked about it before in some of my other episodes. I did an episode called Deconstructing the Nintendo Bump, where I talked to a friend from Spain who kind of is fighting that a lot in a lot of his YouTube content, because a lot of times people say, oh, this system was the best, the best system of its generation.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
And he's like, not so much over in my way type of thing. So
Absolutely.
I was wondering for you, especially since you do focus on a section in the game, or in the book, excuse me, about the ZX Spectrum and like a lot of the microcomputers over in the UK. Did you find it hard to find information about the history of cheating on those systems when so much of game history that's published and what now is North American focused?
That's an excellent question. I mean, I feel that I should give a shout out to the good people of the Internet Archive and some of those fantastic magazines, like, for example, Computer and Video Game Magazine, CVG. There's a huge amount of archives available to view for free there. it wasn't so much of an issue looking at the UK thing. The one thing I try to avoid throughout is I try to avoid saying definitively, this was the very first example, this is the very first cheat, this is the very first cheat code, because although we can say these were the first times, as you say, in a North American or British context, as you pointed out, we can see similar devices being rebranded, and it didn't just stop with Game Shark. I mentioned, for example, a former Game Shark employee produced a cartridge named the Exploder, for instance, the one I had on my PlayStation as a kid, for instance. This worked in exactly the same way. In fact, it was quite a downfall of the devices that the codes would work regardless of whether you bought a branded Game Shark or Action Replay device. So therefore, there was no particular incentive for someone to actually stick with any particular brand. But as you say, this is obviously we're going to have an Anglo-centric attitude towards that. We're going to focus on the systems we grew up with in terms of like the UK and North America. As far as I know, though, when I'm giving examples of, for example, early hardware cheating devices, those were developed either in Britain or in the USA. So we're on reasonably safe ground saying these things.
Well, and I think you, like you said, you were very clear in the book that this is not like the confirmed first of whatever it may be.
Indeed.
It's at best the first known, but obviously that leaves it open for other stuff to find for new.
Indeed. One regret I did have is I was not able to access any of the early BBS, obviously, because they're naturally those are mainly gone the way of all things. So, and I actually mentioned this dilemma, and it's something my wonderful editor Riley, and I spoke about on several occasions. I said, look, I think the best thing to do is be honest with readers and say that these are wonderful days. We're aware of the identity of a number of BBSs that were dedicated to gaming that were incredibly popular, but we couldn't say with any definitive, the level of detail to what extent cheating was mentioned on there eventually. On there, simply they've been lost to time.
Yeah, the early internet was very ephemeral, so it's very hard to.
At least, indeed, absolutely.
Yeah. I guess on a personal level, we've been talking a bit about like what you've incorporated into the book.
Yes.
What's your personal history with cheating in video games? Are you a cheater, Nate?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I was terrible at playing video games. That's why I started cheating. Exactly. So I mentioned introduction to the book as I was very fortunate. Again, this is rather Anglo-centric thing, but I was about 8 or 9 years old. It was 1993, and our parents, at great personal expense, invested in an Acorn Archimedes personal computer, a computer which I kept until about 3 years ago. So I think we got our value for money about that anyway. So we'd also got the wonderful 1991 game Lemming, which originally came out for the Amiga, as you know.
Yes.
Point and click, wonderful puzzle adventure. And I was having great troubles. I was a Cub Scout at the time. I was mentioning I was sort of boasting to my fellow Cub Scouts that I had this. And one of the fellow Scouts, Lee, said to me, if you put in the password, I am not good, into this, you can press spacebar and you can skip levels. Now, this is the first time I'd ever encountered any kind of cheat at all, And this particular level I've been having issue with, of course, breezed past the hard levels, went to the secret ones, and after all, and I remember thinking to myself, my word, can it really be this easy? And at the time, I started reading some computer magazines and local library gaming magazines. I noticed a lot of them had things like walkthroughs, cheat codes, and so on and so forth, and it got so excited. And for me, it was kind of the other way around, because we had a video game rental store. I'd read about some of the cheats in there I'd like to try, and I'd go to the store. I'd actually start trying those particular cheats. To me, it was like discovering some kind of secret. We all like the idea of, we talk about things like a life hack, a secret code, that sort of thing, that sort of thing, secret pass, secret side. I think there's that element to all of us. We like to sort of know a secret no one else does. And at the time, as I said, that meant that knowledge was valuable. That knowledge was much more, it wasn't so esoteric. You couldn't just simply jump on the internet and necessarily find everything you wanted to know.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it almost like gives you a little bit of like a cultural currency within your circles, Indeed. Right? Like where you can pass this bit of information off and you're like, hey, did you know this game? If you type this in or if you do this specific thing, you can. And something else that I really enjoyed about your book that also kind of changed my perspective on, maybe not change my perspective, but it broadened my perspective on cheating video games, is just how much of the rumors and everything
Indeed.
was perpetrated by game magazines, a lot of times for April Fool's pranks. But like, could you talk a little bit about that? Like just some of the stuff you kind of learned through your research of like gaming magazines kind of perpetrating video game cheats and rumors and whatnot?
Absolutely. I mean, my own experience is very different. I used to write down cheats in game magazines like you were talking. I had them on a ring binder and I'd used to bring them into school. But there were times where they actively took part in this. We mentioned before about the Lara Croft cheat, and there's an unofficial rumor that the development team decided never to officially deny it because, of course, so many people would buy or rent the game in order to try and activate it if they could. We talked also about, in my book, about Sheng Long, which was taught a slight mistranslation between Japanese and Chinese pinyin, which made it seem to imply that Ryu's master was actually a playable character. So the video games, of course, and people, I think, also they were more credulous, I think, because these days it'd be very easy to generate a fake image of a computer game. Back then, it was harder using tools like Photoshop.
Yeah.
So when, for example, they said, I can't remember which way around it was. I think the way around it was is you could play the character of Alexander Belmonte in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or play the hero Castlevania in Turtle. That was one of the very first April Fool's pranks that they pulled. But they would obviously put some very clear clues in the articles. For example, it would be the April edition. They would sometimes say one of the locations in which a letter appeared was "fooled again, ha," as an HA, as in Hawaii, but of course it's "fooled again, ha," to current people there. And of course, they would include a photograph. But what was really astonishing was even after they admitted in the next issue this was a prank, you'd get millions of people, dozens of people writing in saying, "No, I've actually played this or this." Like, for example, about Ermac in Mortal Kombat saying, "No, this is a red palette swap for Scorpion. I played this character. I've done this before." People swearing blind. Was it a case of the Mandela effect, people joining in on the joke? We can't be sure. People just wanting to join in the fun.
That got me. The Mandela effect. I completely forgot that was one of the things you brought up, and I was thinking about this. Should there be a gaming specific version of the Mandela effect? Like, do we have a name? Is it like the Ermac effect? Is it the Shenglong effect? What would be the video game equivalent to the Mandela effect?
Absolutely. I think the issue with the Mandela effect, of course, is it seems if enough people push for it, it becomes real. Now, we talked in the book, for example, about nuclear Gandhi, about the original Age of Empires. Ostensibly, he became a new civilization. My apologies. He becomes a nuclear megalomaniac because of the misunderstanding of what it is. And what was surprising to me, it's an incredibly intricate misunderstanding. They talk about the fact that there is a certain a score for persons, over a leader's ability to be peaceful and seek democracy or wage war. They say there's an integer overflow. And even when the original developers denied that, that's simply not how the game worked. People would do this. But of course, in later versions of the game, they made sure that as a sort of tongue-in-cheek joke. But it was the same with Diablo, of course, when they, of course, people were convinced there was a cow level. And as a result, the developers, of course, produced a picture of this. But you remember later on, of course, in StarCraft, they even put a cheat code in saying there is no cow level. They were completely clear about this. But later on, of course, they did introduce one as well. So there must be a gaming-specific Mandela effect. But it seems to me if it becomes big enough, the developers finally will cave in and put it in all the same and make it come true. So,
I mean, it makes it come true in like newer games, but not all. I love stories like that though. I love stories of developers listening to their community and being
absolutely
hearing their crazy conspiracy theories, and we're like, well, we could use that. There is no cow level in Diablo 1, but we could put some more bovines in the second one.
Absolutely.
It's so amusing to me.
Perhaps we should call it the Gandhi effect, considering after nuclear Gandhi. We'll see if we can coin that term on your podcast, see if it goes viral. That's an idea.
There we go, the Gandhi effect. I like that. I like that. On kind of back to a more personal note for you, do you have an all-time favorite cheat? Is there something that you like, an all-time favorite cheat code or a glitch or something like that from your gaming experiences?
There's been a few I've really enjoyed. I mean, the first I encountered, I already mentioned to you. I also discovered the warp zones in the original Super Mario Brothers independently. I was very pleased with myself about that. But the one I used to ask people most about, and it's one of my favorites, is to do with Doom, the God mode IDDQD, which, of course, I think probably because it's one of the most visually satisfying cheats. As you know, as soon as you enter it, his eyes start to glow. And you're immune to most forms of damage. And when I was researching this book back in 2020, I would often anonymously go on forums and I said, I wouldn't say, hey, I'm writing a book. I just said, look, guys, out of interest, what's your favorite cheat? And that answer would come up very consistently, IDDQD, the God mode there. Maybe because it's very easy to input, maybe because it gives you good feedback, maybe it's because it's an extremely powerful cheat. It lets you simply become a tourist and wander through the game. Maybe that's what it's about. I don't know.
That kind of makes me think of another question. Now, this is not to put your feet to the fire or anything like that, but
Yes.
a contentious topic in gaming now is if you have a retro game and you beat that retro game with save states, something away
Yes.
from the way games were originally intended, you did
Yes.
not beat the game. I don't really have a strong opinion. Personally, I'm kind of like, well, you technically didn't, but I'm also like, you still did the challenge. It's a weird middle ground for me.
Indeed.
But do you, not to ask you about like what you think of that, but if you go back to original games, if you beat a game with cheat codes, did you beat the game in your opinion? This is not gospel, so listeners, don't be mad if you agree or disagree.
Absolutely.
But I'm genuinely just curious, because for me, I beat Sonic 2, for example, with the sound test code, where you have to type in the code to then get to level select, so that way I could get back to the final boss, because I was not having replaying the game
absolutely
all the way from the beginning again.
Up, down, left, right, hold down A and press start. Is that correct? I think that's the one, isn't it?
For Sonic, it's like
I should know that.
I forget what the Sonic one is. It's like you have to go to specific numbers. You go to like 9 and 28 or something. I forget. There's specific numbers
that will let you get
to that you get you to the sound test, you're on the sound test, you put in specific sound test numbers, and then once you put the right one in, you get level select, and that's very helpful.
Absolutely. It comes down to what we were saying before about the so-called speed run. Let's say you use the warp whistle and Mario to skip past certain levels or the sound test. The question is, I suppose, are you playing the game in which it was, in the same sense it was meant to be played? Now, my personal favorite video game of all time, Resident Evil 2 from 1998, original one there. So now, that's an interesting game in the sense that, in like a lot of games in the series, you have an opportunity to save at certain points. In this case, you have to pick up ink ribbons and save them using a typewriter. Now, the more you save, the less likely you are to get a higher grade when you finish the game. So if you're trying to claim some kind of status for having completed with a higher grade, and then you use something like an emulator to save and load from any point, then I suppose you could argue in that case that you don't particularly merit it. But the bizarre thing is, if you do complete the game with a satisfactory grade like A or B, the next time you play, you'll be given a weapon with infinite ammunition, which radically alters the nature of the game. You can get through it faster. You don't have to hold so much in your inventory after. You don't have to risk your safety to go back and forth through ammunition. But that is an intended feature of the game itself. So I suppose if we wanted to do that, we probably have to look at it on a game-by-game basis, wouldn't we? Look at the criteria and say, but I do say towards the end of the book about the legacy of cheating, is emulators to some extent are a cheat. There are two things really. First of all, you can save and load from any point, but also you can alter the frame rate of any game. Now, some games become more difficult by becoming faster as time goes on. Tetris is one good example of that. And you can essentially subvert that altogether by using an emulator. As we said, that's probably why game records had to be played in original hardware, else anyone could simply tinker an emulator to their particular needs.
That also reminds me of another point that really interested me about your book, was that cheating in video games has evolved so much so where it's the cheating now is very negatively viewed because of obviously the competitive play.
Of course.
But a lot of the stuff that we knew for cheat codes back in the 80s and 90s and 2000s are now accessibility features.
Indeed.
Which is such a really interesting evolution. And I don't consider accessibility features cheating. I consider it what it's called, accessibility. It's meant for people who can't play games in specific ways, whether due to colorblind, whether due to disability, or whether just due to some people just aren't that good at games. And they like, I have friends who love video games, but they've not really progressed in their skill level for years, even though they play a lot. So there's just some, and there's no shade at that whatsoever. It's just just matter what it was. It was funny. I actually had my cousin over here earlier today, and it was interesting seeing him play. He's 13. And it was interesting seeing him play where like he was doing things where I'm like, oh man, like why aren't you reacting fast enough? And then I also have to remember like I'm in my late 30s, I've had 30 years of gaming experience where it's like I'm kind of used to that. So accessibility features. Yeah, exactly. So I just found that super interesting. What was that like a revelation to you in doing research for this book, of kind of like how a lot of cheat codes back in the 80s are now more like accessibilities, or was that something you kind of already, were mulling over as you were writing?
Yes, I mean, it's a fascinating aspect of the book because this was something I'd never intended to explore in any level of detail. I've simply devoted a couple of paragraphs to it because I'd seen that certain strategy guides these days recommend using accessibility features, even if you don't have any, impairments of that kind, to be able to give yourself something of an edge. And it was my amazing editor, Riley McLeod, who suggested we should probably devote an actual chapter to this after all, not talking about how the playing field can be leveled by people who might, for example, say visual impairments or physical impairments, but also talking about how people sometimes use that to their advantage. Now, so, for example, one game, The Last of Us, which I've not played but watched others play, there's a thing about apparently part of this fact is you're trying to rummage around in the dark for special items a lot of the time. And in the game, it can actually highlight them for you. Similarly, it can also highlight enemies as they come towards to make it a little easier to spot them as they come. Obviously, anyone can see that's an enormous advantage, even if you've never played the game before. But for some people, it might be necessary to allow them to enjoy the game on equal terms. The other divisive issue in the gaming community, I know, is about whether or not to play games on easy mode. My best friend Nick, who helped me with some of the fact checking for this book, God bless him, he continually teases me because at one point I played a demo of Dino Crisis, allegedly for the record, on easy mode by accident, of course. My hand slipped, and but some people will say, well, isn't the important thing is that you're enjoying the overall play experience? You're not actually necessarily setting out to set yourself a challenge. I mean, do we not, for example, sometimes watch things like TV shows we watched as a kid to simply relax? Do we not read books we've read before? Do we not read things like Harry Potter simply because of the fact that we find the experience relaxing and nostalgic, not necessarily because we want to challenge or better ourselves in any way?
No, absolutely. And real quick, just to touch on The Last of Us and the accessibility features, I want to shout out a previous guest of the show. Unfortunately, they have passed since.
I'm
So I
sorry.
still want to shout out this person. His name was Brandon Cole, and he was a blind accessibility consultant on video games. He worked on The Last of Us Part 2 and the Last of Us remake before he passed, and he is one of the people that helped make the game blind accessible. And it was
That's
a really
fantastic.
fascinating chat talking to him about his work as a blind as an accessibility consultant,
It's a fascinating exercise, absolutely. And hats off to me. We look at this, and to some extent, I've explored this. And there's, for example, Nintendo at one point invented a supposedly accessible controller, which cost a fortune. I think we've come a long way with this as well, to do, and the people are. But it's become an issue as well because, for example, someone who, for example, might have visual impairments might also need something like a screen overlay on their game to help see things more clearly or to see stats more clearly. And sometimes this can be falsely flagged as something that's been used for cheating purposes in modern titles. This isn't a subject I'm particularly familiar with, but my understanding is you can now contact developers to say, look, this is actually an accessibility fix. This isn't something I'm trying to do to give myself an edge over other players to enjoy on equal terms.
And that really, like, I like that in the book you didn't necessarily come down on one side of the argument or the other. You just kind of stated like, hey, this is like where the conversation is at currently. And it's an interesting conversation because, like, especially in competitive games, how do you like that's got to be so hard. Like, if there's competitive games and a player needs the accessibility options to play, does it keep it on a fair playing field with everyone else? Which
Absolutely.
I would trust it to the individual gaming leagues to figure out that delineation and how they
You'd
would
have to.
vet
I
that
think in the
type of
case of,
thing.
and I've seen one accessibility option, for example, is rather than to repeatedly tap a button, you could press and hold it. Now, if there is a game which required you to simply tap a button at speed, you can see how simply pressing and holding would give you that advantage. And the question is then, do we give it to every single player, even able-bodied one? Do we give it to someone that, it seems to me it's something of a minefield. You'd have to sit down and deal with this on a case-by-case basis, but fortunately, we don't have to decide such things ourselves. So we're protected from that.
I would not, and I do not envy anyone having to make those types of calls.
No.
In doing research for this, I asked before, what was something that surprised you that you learned? And I think more specifically, was there something that surprised you maybe about like the etymology of a specific cheat? Like was there or like a specific cheat, or was there something that you were researching that was surprisingly popular that you didn't expect to be so popular? Like you mentioned the Doom, the God mode Doom code, like
Absolutely.
that was referenced a whole lot. Was there anything, whether that or something else, that just like in doing research, and it doesn't have to necessarily be specific to the etymology of a code or
Absolutely.
specific to the popularity of some type of aspect of this of your research, but was there something that just in the course of your research that just you're like, wow, I was not expecting to find this?
There's a few things that really caught me off guard. I think we touched on briefly before about the sheer level of belief people had about the cheats that weren't. One of the chapters I cover about simply cheats that never actually existed.
The
And what
Gandhi
really
effect,
surprised
yes.
the Gandhi effect, as we talked about, as we've now coined, of course, so, and we want copyright acknowledgement every single time anyone else uses this, of course, but naturally, so, and it would the sheer conviction with which people persisted in these wrong beliefs in the face of things like saying, look, this is not, and to some extent that was understandable. I mentioned, for example, one of the first console I had was a NES, and you had the game of Duck Hunt, where you fire, and of course there was the dog there, and people would sometimes fire at the dog, which had no effect whatsoever. Now in the arcade version on the Nintendo VS, it did. If you shot the dog, it would say, "Oh, please don't shoot me, shoot the thing." Said now, and there were also subsequent games where the dog did appear, where you could shoot it. So you could understand up to a point why people might misremember why they were able to shoot the dog in the NES. But other games, we talked before about things like, Ermac, we talked about Shannon. People were absolutely insisting, no, if you simply go and do this and you fight 10 rounds without taking a single punch, and and you make sure you get a flawless victory every single time, you'll definitely unlock this hidden character. And you wondered to what extent people were pulling each other's legs, to what extent people actually sincerely believe this. It was fascinating. The other thing which really caught me off guard was the sheer level of opposition from the game industry towards cheap devices in particular. Now, up to a point, I understood, for example, when the original Action Replay came out from the Commodore 64, the ability to be able to freeze the game memory would definitely have made making pirated copies of games much easier. So up to a point, I said, but like with the Game Genie, the way it operated, as I explained in the book, it was simply modifying memory addresses temporarily. And in the nature of things, because it slotted over the original cartridge, you needed to have the game, you needed a legitimate game to be able to use it. So there was no particular reason for Nintendo or anyone or Sega to feel threatened by it. And as a matter of fact, Nintendo hugely opposed it. Now, Sega did endorse the Game Genie, but as I uncovered when I was going through the interviews, it would seem that it wasn't quite so enthusiastic as we might think. It would seem that it's possible that the people behind it might have simply, Codemaster might have said, well, this is what we're capable of doing. Do you want years of legal battles, or do you want to simply get on board with this? And therefore Sega said, okay, we'll applaud the Game Genie. In their particular case, because of the way the different regional things work for what you would call the Genesis, I would have called the Mega Drive, they had different shaped cartridges, as you know, depending on which particular region. Using the Game Genie meant you could play a cartridge from a different region. So you were effectively bypassing region knockouts by using, although that, of course, wasn't the intended effect of the actual Game Genie itself. So that was something which really surprised me. First of all, I thought it's a surprise to me that Sega agreed to this quite so readily, and it turned out later on maybe it wasn't quite so enthusiastic and welcomed with open arms as we thought.
Maybe it might have been one of those things where they like, this will be good PR, and then they realized the can of worms they opened by accident.
Yes, indeed, absolutely. Opening Pandora's box in this way, absolutely, something. And the other thing, of course, is I'd always been intrigued about, because I'd seen the Game Genie as a kid, and that came with a booklet of codes, and I had wondered at the time, okay, well, what happens as new games come out? But these days, the answer would be obvious. You simply put it on a website. But at the time, it wasn't possible. They started having phone lines or subscription services. You paid a few dollars and they were sent to you in the mail. And it was a fairly involved process as far as I could see.
Yeah, that was something that was really fascinating to me too, because there's I hadn't really thought about how cheat codes were spread, because when I first started really getting into cheat codes in video games, it was like the early days of the internet. I'm just a little bit younger than you. I was born in '89. And so when I first started really getting into it, it was like, 9 or 10. So by that time, 99, 2000, like you could go to your local library, at least here in North America,
Yeah,
and or go to an internet cafe. I know that's not really a thing in North America, but it's a thing in other places. Um, and I would just
indeed.
go and get, like I said, the top of the episode, get codes and all that other stuff. So, learning how cheat codes were disseminated through magazines, I was not surprised by, but
Naturally.
like, but the books that Game Genie would sell in order to get it to work, and like I had no idea they would sell like update books. Like you could get a quarterly Game Genie book, which is
Indeed.
just a subscription cheat code book is a wild business idea to me now, but just because we're used to the internet, because everything's
Happily
just
so.
there for you.
Happily so.
It's fascinating.
And no guarantee that your particular chosen game would feature. They would simply send you, and you'd be sent a load of redundant codes as well. You simply have to hope for the best that yours came up. Now,
Hmm.
the methods they had to use, of course, they simply had no other method really than trial and error. They had to simply employ engineers to try different codes until they actually managed to hit upon
That's
something that was
wild.
genuinely useful. So brute forcing, as we would call it,
Yeah,
at its earliest.
that's so wild to me. That's just crazy.
Indeed.
Um, in with the evolution of how cheating in games has gone, not that I know you said you don't play a lot of modern games, but you have a pretty good sense of that now. It's not
Yeah.
really the same that it used to be. It's more a world of aim bots and making other
Yes.
people. I actually had, you know what, here's a fun anecdote. I had a friend of mine who would bridge players. You ever heard of bridging? I don't know if there's another term for it. There probably is. But basically what he would do on the original Xbox, he would bridge people in Halo 2. And what it was is that he plugged his Xbox to his computer,
Yes.
and he was able to turn his internet off and on rapidly, like just really, really fast. So
Right.
that way it would make his connection appear to be weaker. And because he could do that, he could then at that time Xbox, there was no servers, individual Xboxes would host the game. So if you had
Right.
host for the game, everyone would connect to your Xbox over the internet and you would
Absolutely.
play like that. So what he would do is he would force host onto himself, because the player with the weakest connection would get host, because which kind of makes sense, I guess, to
Hmm.
an extent.
Yeah.
And then he would just play normally. But if he wanted to bridge someone, what that he called it bridging. I don't know if that's the proper term or if there's a different term. He would just rapidly turn his internet on and off. It would make
Right.
everyone else lag except for him. And
Ah,
so what
yes.
he would do is he would get players on his team, and they would pay him in Xbox Live subscriptions to bridge them up ranks in Halo 2, and then he would get free Xbox Live subscriptions from this.
Dastardly,
It,
dastardly.
it was wild, and it's
That's
something where like
fantastic.
he oh, listen, I'm not defending it, but at the same time, he would generally only bridge to give himself host so someone else couldn't have the advantage. Because that's another interesting thing in terms of competitive advantage. There was a thing in Halo 2 called host shoddy, because if you had the shotgun and you were host, you had like a half a second advantage in terms of reaction time, because
Indeed,
everyone's
indeed,
connecting to you. And
indeed.
if you have a shotgun and you're up close, that's a big deal.
Absolutely.
So he would force host to himself so other people couldn't abuse, and then never use the shotgun so other people couldn't abuse it. I'm not saying that
Indeed.
made it okay what he did, where he would essentially cheat people their way up in the ranks, but it was really, really interesting to
Absolutely.
see that. Um, I don't know where I was going with that, but I was just thinking about like the history of cheating in video games. I'm like, oh, I
Absolutely.
actually have like a story of a friend
But
that did
absolutely,
this.
absolutely. So, I suppose the question is, where what are what's at stake here? Because if it's simply saying, "Well, I've got a number one rank here on a computer screen," that's fine. Of course, these days when Fortnite players are potentially playing for tens of thousands of dollars, you can understand why they might say,
Yeah.
"We're not so fond of the aimbots after all." And we've got a whole industry around anti-cheating now, of course, like kernel level monitoring and that kind of stuff,
Hmm.
checking someone's accuracy rate to make sure it's not too high. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, and back then for him, I don't know if aimbots were much of a thing on Halo 2, because it was on a
No,
console type of thing, and it was
absolutely.
like that technology wasn't as readily available. It might have been, I have no idea. He didn't have it, so I didn't really know. But it's just really funny to me to see, like, I didn't even think about it. And funnily enough, I didn't have Xbox Live. I couldn't. My parents couldn't afford it. but he would let me borrow his account every now and then. And he had an
Right.
account called I Lag You Lag, which was his account that he would use to bridge people. Uh,
Good
uh,
luck.
yeah,
Very good.
they putting it right on Front Street, not even trying to hide it. But when I would play it, obviously I didn't bridge; I just played.
Of course.
So anytime I did good, people would accuse me of cheating. I'm like, no, I'm actually doing what I'm supposed to.
Exactly so.
It
I
was
remember it
very
was a common trick. So at one point, I had a job going door to door selling broadband to people, and that was one of our selling points. Which you're playing some game like Call of Duty, apparently, and again, you have to tell me if this is wrong or not. But if you could overwhelm someone by letting off, for example, lots of grenades in their area, it could lead their connection to slow down to an extent that would freeze momentarily. At which point, you could then, of course, it's similar to opposed to the shotgun trick you mentioned, of course, with the host. After all, so you could exploit someone's slower connection in that way. A whole new host of exploits, if not exactly cheating, I suppose.
That's definitely part of it, and it was a combination of the limitations of networks at the time and also the hardware, because I remember playing LAN parties of X on Halo
back in the day, exactly so.
and and so obviously you don't have the latency that you would have with the internet. You have some because it's going through Ethernet cables to a hub and all this other stuff, but I remember having issues where we would put like 12 people on the smallest map possible with infinite grenades and explosives. And if too many people were shooting, the game could not render. It would just chug for everybody because there was just too much happening. To bring it back to what I was going to ask before that, I completely went off on the story about.
It's very interesting. Absolutely, there's a lot about these things. Absolutely.
Well, there's something I don't know how many people know about that. The bridging thing is something that I have not heard other people talk about. I've heard about aimbots and all the other stuff that like now there's like a whole like suite of like cheating software you can buy from different companies, which is crazy. But the bridging thing, I don't hear much people talk about. What I was going to ask, though, before I got sidetracked on that story, was even though you don't play modern games much or at all, from what you were telling me, but you have a pretty good grasp on what's happening with it. What would you like to see return in terms of cheat codes for video games? I'm not talking about in terms of competitive things. I'm not talking about aimbots or this type of stuff. But like, there's a whole chapter dedicated to kind of the cosmetic and Easter egg type of cheat codes.
Absolutely.
Like big head mode. Bring back big head mode, man. I want to see more games with big head mode. More goofy ideas. There was a game, Madden 2001 or 2000, where like some of the cheats you could turn on were like transporting sideline. So when you're playing American football, you would run out of bounds and you would just appear on the other side of the field. You could also put on zero gravity, so you could just jump over like
the moonshot.
Yeah. So this is obviously a very personal question, but for you, what cheat codes, whether it's the weird cosmetic things like big head mode or gravity or any of that type of stuff, or just here's 30 extra lives. What would be something that you would like to see come back with cheat codes in video games?
That's an excellent question. I mean, the way that they've done it with modern games, as I understand it, I think is probably the situation I like, which is where, for example, the 2016 remake of Doom, you could enable God mode, but it won't work when you're in multiplayer mode. So I think probably I'd like to see the full feature set come back. You can no-clip, you can be a God, you can have extra life, but simply make it so that it's only when you're playing in the single-player mode. That's probably the fairest way to. But in terms of novelty cheats, and another thing I've devoted a chapter to as well, I think things like big head mode, seeing smaller players, it adds an excellent variation to it. And I think it's also a great way to encourage particularly younger kids to get into gaming as well. And you make it a little bit more fun, a little bit more novel in that way. If I mentioned, for example, Turok Dinosaur Hunter as a disco mode, where you see lots of flashing coloured lights, and instead of attacking you, the dinosaurs start dancing. So, who could object to that after all?
That's kind of what I would love to see too, just the silly stuff back again, because I feel like games take themselves so seriously.
Very much so. Absolutely.
And I love that. I want games to still do that, but I also want there to be some juxtaposition. I want there to be some variety in it, where I want to be able to play I want to see a game where even if it's multiplayer, just like turn on big head mode for everybody, right? Like not just one player, but everyone gets big head mode. Just see these absurd bodies running around, these absurd proportions, or the transporting sidelines in Madden. I think Madden doesn't have cheat codes like that, as far as I'm aware. I don't know for certain, but like a lot of sports games don't really have those types of cheat codes. And in general, sports games aren't what they used to be when you think of like NBA Jam, where it's like this just goofy, over the top, like ridiculous version of a sport. I don't know. I would personally
Absolutely.
just like to see like the silliness come
Yeah,
back
yeah, the
again.
novelty. You can do that, of course, novelty characters. I mentioned, for example, Banjo Kazooie. At one point, you could play as a washing machine. In my favorite game, Resident Evil 2, you can even play as a giant stick of tofu. And these don't actually materially disadvantage you or advantage you in gameplay in particular. So you could actually get away with that. NBA, have the characters as Looney Tunes. I mean, what's the harm in that after all? So,
Hmm.
so,
Just something silly like that. I'm
absolutely.
absolutely all for that. I don't really have much else to ask you, Nate. Actually, I kind of covered all I wanted to, because I also don't want to go too much further into your book, because I want to give my listeners a reason to get the book and read the
Please do.
book.
Early and often,
And
please. And Nadia's as well,
uh,
please.
and there's a lot of stuff in here that we have not talked about. So
Absolutely.
I just, first of all, I want to thank you for your time on this.
Well, thank you for having
The
me.
way I kind of wrap up the show before we go into plugs and final thoughts and all this other stuff, not final thoughts, but plugs and shout outs and all this other stuff, is for all my interviews, famously to my listeners, I give my interviewee questions from Courtney. Questions from Courtney. Courtney, once again, famously to my listeners, she is my wife who knows nothing about video games or all the nerdy crap that I do, and I love her very much for
You're very
that,
lucky
because
woman, indeed.
she gives me questions that I would not have thought to ask. So I always like
Oh,
to end the
absolutely.
interviews with a super random question that she came up with. So
That's an excellent
uh,
idea. I mean, so.
so my final question for you is: if you could bring a fictional / mythical creature to real life, which would it be?
Well, I think personally, if I could bring a mythical creature to life, I would probably choose the unicorn. Now, aside
Mm.
from the fact it's already the national animal of Scotland, after all, so of course we're in good company, after all, So aside from the fact it's meant to have magical properties, after all, So apparently they're meant to have a wonderful effect on everyone around them and increase their sense of well-being because they're innately good. And God knows we need more goodness in the world. Let's face it.
We absolutely do, and my daughter would very much appreciate that pick, because she was very sad. My daughter's 5, and she was very sad when she found out that unicorns are not real, and she wants them to be real so bad.
Absolutely. Well, if you believe in it, after all, it's one of those things. And I think I saw that meme on the internet saying, always be yourself unless you can be a unicorn, and then being, in which case you should be a unicorn.
And you know what? Maybe if there's enough of a Gandhi effect, unicorns will exist at some
Absolutely.
point.
That's it. We can only hope.
But but all right, Nate, thank you once again for joining me, man. I really appreciate you giving me your time for this.
So thank you for having me.
To wrap up this episode, where can the good people find you online, and what would you like to promote?
Well, you can find the book itself on retrogamerbooks.com. You can find a brief preview of the book and more information about me and my work at my website, natedrake.com, as well. Also, I give a shout out to my fellow author, Nadia Oxford, who's released Pixels to Prose, an excellent narrative take on role-playing games. I know she's already appeared on this podcast before. I treat us, because our books are published together, so it's like Barbenheimer, Please buy them both early and often and read them. They're both fantastic reads.
They really are both fantastic reads, and I feel bad that it took me so long to get you on the show. Like I like a little behind the scenes for myself. After I finished, even with Nadia's book, I was going through like a little bit of a mental funk, so it was hard for me to get the motivation, because like there's a ton of
I
other stuff
understand.
I had to get done.
Of
But
course.
I got out of it and I finished the book, and I really enjoyed my time with it. So yeah, everyone, please go read this book. Like I said, I did get a review copy, but I did, like I said at the top of the episode, it really did change my perspective on cheat codes. I never really considered them this cultural force in gaming, and they
Absolutely.
are. They have been and they still are now, for a negative reason, unfortunately. But back in the day, it was a very positive reason. It was something that
Absolutely.
we talked already, a cultural currency with you and your friends. Like if you knew cheat codes, like you were
Oh, we shared it absolutely.
you
Do
were
so.
big time, or just
And
even it kind of also ties into the fact of playground rumors of just talking to friends, whether at arcades or on the playground, and just about like, oh, did you try this or did you try that, and it's all kind of all tied together in it's all tied together with gaming in ways that I was not expecting. So I that's my endorsement for the book, is that it changed the way I view about cheating in video games. I like cheating now. No, I found it. I just found it super
Don't
fascinating.
stop
So
cheating.
please.
It makes a big difference. And something I forgot to mention, I'd like to add as well. I've recently recorded an audiobook version of I Am Not Good. You get it for free if you buy the ebook or paperback. You can also get it on Audible as well. So that's something to think about. I know some people prefer to digest books that way.
I will actually have to let my friend Andrew know about this, because I was talking about this book last night. We stream every Tuesday night. Not last night, 2 nights ago. We stream every Tuesday night on his channel, on his Twitch channel, The Experience Point, and we do this little talk show called Talk Tuesday. It's usually about just what we've experienced throughout the week, whether it's like real life stuff, game stuff, movie stuff, all that jazz. Excellent. And I brought up that I literally finished the book that day at the time of the we streamed. I just finished it.
So you were the one.
Yeah. I finished it just in the nick of time. But I finished it, and I was talking about it. He's like, I'll have to listen to that. I'm like, well, Retro Game Books is a smaller publisher. I don't know if they're going to have an audiobook, but you've answered my question right here. So I can let him know there is an audiobook version of I Am Not Good.
Absolutely. Available in all good stores, absolutely. I just find some people prefer to digest books in that way when they're doing something else. You're having a shave, you're washing the dishes. Yeah, so that way.
Totally get it. So, all right. Well, are you on social media at all? Sorry, before I forget.
You can find links to my socials on on Nate Drake. I'm also on Blue Sky, natedrake.bsky.app.
All right. As for myself, you can follow me on social media at stillloadingpodcast.com on Blue Sky, at stillloadingpod on Twitch and Instagram. On Twitch, I stream whenever the hell I'm able to. It really just depends on what I'm feeling like, which is lately I have not been in the mood to stream, but I did just beat a game for the podcast before we were recording. So now I have a little bit more free time than I thought. So who knows? Maybe there'll be something coming down the pipe. Anyway, that's where you can find me online. If you like the show and you want to support it, the easiest way you can do that is give it a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whichever podcasting app you use. It does help more people find the show, and it pleases the algorithm gods.
Indeed.
Or something along those lines. And if you give I Am Not Good a read, give it a 5-star rating on Goodreads or whatever book website you prefer to use. So that's an easy way to support the show, just, on giving it a rating and review on whichever podcasting app you use. If you like the show a lot, though, and you want to support it a little bit more, there is a Patreon, patreon.com/stillloadingpod. For $1 a month, you get all the episodes earlier with better audio quality, as well as access to patron voting rights, which help guide the direction of the show. In fact, the game I mentioned that I beat earlier is one of those patron choices. So I do actually finish what I am set out to do. So that's all over at the $1 level. For $3 a month, you get everything from the previous tier, plus patron shoutouts, which you heard at the beginning of this episode. For $4 a month, you get the previous 2 tiers, plus 2 mini bonus episodes every month. And for $5 a month, you get all of it. All of the stuff I've already mentioned, plus access to my monthly movie podcast, which right now, it changes name depending on the theme. But right now, the theme is Muppets. So it is called Still Muppeting, and it is the only Muppet movie podcast where me and my friend Doug play the music, light the lights, and we talk about the Muppets on Still Muppeting tonight. And that is all over at patreon.com/stillloadingpod. And who knows, after I finish Still Muppeting, I might do some Kevin Smith movies. I'll call that Still Askew. Or maybe I'll do Jason Statham and call it Still Stathaming. We'll find out whatever I feel like afterwards. Patreon.com/stillloadingpod. But that is it. That is all the time I have for you on this episode of Still Loading. Thank you all so much for listening. Nate, thank you once again for joining me.
Thank you so much.
And with all that said, listeners, I will see you all next time.